Welcome to A Dose of Feel Good. I'm your host, Whitney Bischoff, and today we are talking about if you are running on empty, small dose, little wins. You can see full show notes at doseoffeelgood.my.canva.site. Now let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back. We are at episode 42 already, and in our mini series number 3 that corresponds with our stickers. So if you have not taken a look at our Etsy shop and looked at the stickers that go along with this as our helpful reminders that you're not alone in what you might be facing, take a look at those. But our topic this week is if you're running on empty, small dose, little wins. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm running on empty maybe sometimes 99% of the time. And that is just not a fun place to be in. So we're going to talk through that a little bit and find moments where we can really look for the little wins in life, because I know I've mentioned this before, but they're all around us. So we're going to talk through it and work together to find those little wins. I want to start with talking through the quote, which every time I hear this quote, I cringe a little bit. But it's the quote that you can't pour from an empty cup. And I know we all know that that's the reality, but anytime I hear that, I'm like, yeah, I get it. But the reality is that life asks a lot of us as humans. And so when we're told, oh, you can't pour from an empty cup, it takes a second, because when is there time to refill that empty cup? There, a lot of the time, is not time to do that. But I think on an even deeper reality is that we keep doing more and more, and we don't take that time to refill because we often feel like we have to prove our worth. So the empty gets more empty and more empty, or we refill maybe just enough to move to the next thing. And that's not super healthy. So we are in this constant cycle rather than pausing to refuel. So that constant empty feeling, because we're just trying to move through all of the things to prove that we deserve to exist in this space. And that's so unhealthy, but it just comes from this space that I just want to prove to the world that I should exist here, or that I have to do XYZ to exist in this space. And rather than just knowing that I'm enough just as is. And so it just perpetuates this feeling of constantly feeling like I have to run on empty, and not giving our energy to ourselves and honoring what that looks like. And we then get to this point, because we're at this constant empty stage, that we forget how to even refuel because it's been so long. I think of this as, think of your car being on empty, right? You put just enough gas in that you, just to get by, right? Just to get from point A to point B. And so you're constantly at the gas station, which probably takes more time than just refueling your car to the whole, the entire tank, right? But if you haven't done it for so long, you forget sometimes how to do that. And it's the same for our own tanks. It's like, what actually brings me joy? What actually is going to replenish my empty cup? That's really what we're talking about here. And I think when we're talking about the little wins and how do we actually move out of a space of just being constantly on empty, is when we give ourselves this boost, right? More than just this little boost, but when we really refuel that completely, we know we perform better, we feel better, and we're just all around better when that tank is completely full, right? When we pause long enough to move from just that little tick from point A to point B, but really refuel that tank completely. We know we're then our best selves, but oftentimes we don't give ourselves that space, or we don't do it often enough, so we are completely depleted, and then it takes more time to refuel. So I think when we think of this, we know that energy is meant to be at a premium, not at a minimum. So I think of this often, again, with my own gas tank. My husband taught me this, that, you should never let your gas tank go beyond half. And I've really started to think of that. And if we think of that for ourselves too, if we never let our energy in our tank go beyond half, we are going to be constantly running at a higher state. And it doesn't take as long then to refuel. And so I think if we think of that in our own sense too, that if we put more intention behind doing those things that bring us joy and refuel us, then we're going to live in that higher performance, or that feeling better, rather than feeling like we're constantly running on empty, because that's just not a fun place to be in, and it's exhausting and overwhelming. And unfortunately, we live in a space where there's a culture that pushes that emptiness and almost this competitiveness of who can be more empty, who gives less space to refuel. And I think it's interesting because no one ever wants to feel empty, and yet we have a culture where really pushes that narrative where the more that you're running, the more worth you bring to the table, which is a little bit wild. And we'll talk a little bit more of how to actually do this, but I think it starts with one intentional refuel. So one intentional thing that brings you joy, and then celebrate that victory that you have done that. Like it's a gold medal win, right? That you were able to put the energy in to do those things that bring you joy, and recognize that you're a big deal, that you are a big deal enough to put in the time to do those things that refuel your cup or your tank, or whatever analogy you want to use, because you are enough in that space to give yourself that intention to move from that empty space to a space where you have enough energy to get through those days, and to not live in a space where you're constantly on empty, where you're living in that space where you're at least at that half tank, right? But we want to be at full energy. So I think just really knowing and celebrating that you're a big deal and you owe it to yourself to be in that space. Whew, I was excited there. So how does this actually look in practice? So for me, I'm definitely someone, I know I'm getting to empty when I start to isolate. So people and connection are a huge piece for me. And so I know I'm getting to empty when it feels like a chore to be around people, even strangers. I love talking to people, connecting with people, getting to know people. So I know that I'm reaching empty when it's difficult to engage in those conversations, or when I just don't want to be in those spaces. Is a huge sign for me. And I recognize that I'm getting to that space and that I need to refuel sooner, because again, I love being around people. And so sometimes, at least for me, I do have to force myself in those spaces, because I know connecting with people is a little bit part of my refuel, and I'm okay with that. But then also recognizing that as a win, that pushing myself a little bit is also energizing for me. So it's this give and take a little bit, that recognizing that my energy might be depleted in those moments, but then also using that as an opportunity to refuel. I also use that as my space to take a pause. that was my maybe bump to get from point A to point B, but then pause and do something a little bit bigger that brings me joy. So I'm a big dancer, so I might take a break and listen to music, go on a car ride, and do some dances in my car. So not anything too crazy, but I will give myself that time and space. Or I'm a big food girly. So I'm currently on a diet, so it's a little bit difficult out here. But I will give myself the space to either have ice cream or some sort of treat, something along those lines that I'm like, oh, this is going to give me that dopamine boost, if you will, and give myself the space to do that. And that's okay because it brings me joy, right? So whatever that is in that moment, but that's my first sign is when I am not wanting to connect with folks, and then push myself a little bit, give myself that little boost, and then making that time to invest a little bit more energy because gosh dang it, I'm awesome and I deserve to give myself that full tank, if you will. So what's the impact of really investing in you and moving from that space of empty and celebrating those little wins and giving yourself those joyful moments? So I think we can all recognize that running on empty leaves us wounded at our core. So the long-term implications of that is that we just end up feeling like a shell, right? That if you think of a car that is constantly, again, not having fuel, it's just a shell. It doesn't actually run. And that's similar to us as humans, that we're just a shell. We're not our best selves. And we're meant to live fulfilled. We're meant to live as our best self. So even if it's these little wins to refuel, those little things that bring you joy, identify what those are. And when you really are feeling empty, pick on those, right? Lean into those moments that bring you those joyful wins and know that you deserve to live in that fullness. Invest in yourself. So again, if that's ice cream or Taco Bell, do those things. Do those things that give you those little wins to move out of that space of empty. I joke, if it is sexy bingo with the girls or whatever girls' night looks like for you, do that. Make the time. Invest in that. Do and make time for what brings you joy because your cup deserves to be a little bit more full, whatever your full cup looks like for you. And I think really leaning into it doesn't have to be this huge thing. These little wins are what we're talking about. So don't overthink it. The goal is little baby steps. Identify what are the little things that I can do to celebrate, to move out of this empty feeling. Because you're worth it, you're awesome, and we want to live in a space where we can be our best selves. And I just love that. So how do we actually put this into practice? So a couple of things. I think starting with prioritizing you, and that's a daily practice. So identify something you can do that refills your cup daily. This might be something new. I did this probably for about 6 months. I did a daily dance. I did post it on Instagram because I was like, that held me accountable a little bit. And I loved starting my day that way. I should start doing that again, honestly. But what refills your cup each day? You know, I know people practice gratitude. Sometimes it's going to the gym or going for a walk, breathing exercises, whatever that is. Prioritize something you can do for yourself every single day. Start your day feeling really good because you deserve it. I think then once you have that practice really well established, moving into setting a really intentional, either monthly or quarterly, I would recommend both, something that you can invest in yourself that can really move that needle and refill your cup on a larger scale. There's a lot of really great ideas on Pinterest of things you can do, whether by yourself or with others. But I would highly recommend doing those things that maybe are a little bit larger than the little wins that we're talking about, but those things that you can do that really make sure that that tank is at full capacity. Then I also recommend write down one thing that you recognize in yourself when you're chronically on empty. So how do you know when you're at that state versus when you show up and you're completely refueled? How is that different? And then also recognize how you can give yourself a win right now in this moment. What is one thing that you can do to celebrate yourself and to give yourself that win, especially if you're really feeling like you are at that really, really empty stage? Because I think we can all agree we've all been there, and it's just not a fun place to be. So write down one thing that you can give yourself as a win right now, and lean into that, because you're worth it, and we all deserve to be in a space where we're not constantly feeling like we're on empty. So that's how we're going to wrap up today. I really got passionate and really got into that today, which I was a little surprised about, but I hope you enjoyed it. As a reminder, you really do deserve to be in a space where you're refueled, you're finding the good in the universe, and we're connecting in that space where we don't feel like we are constantly on empty. So if you really loved the episode, give me a comment. Let me know what else you might want to hear. And then also take a look at the sticker in case you need that reminder of finding those little wins. I'd love to hear from y'all. Otherwise, I hope you have a great week and stay tuned for next week. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you are feeling ready to conquer the week and let your impact ripple out to the world around you. Let's connect on Instagram and Threads at Dose of Feel Good Podcast. If you're loving the podcast, I'd love it if you'd hit that subscribe button and leave a review. Until next time, share your own dose of feel good and never underestimate the power of positivity.